This topic of vocabulary development is divided into two short PowerPoints, approximately 6 minutes each. The first part deals with the rate of growth of vocabulary and how that growth occurs. To get us into the vocabulary frame of mind, let's start out with a short exploration of a single word, hypophagy. What do you think it means? Now, read the word in these sentences. Can you define it now? Why? If you had to highlight the words and or phrases in these sentences that help you define hypophagy, what would they be? These words are the context clues or cues that tipped you off to the meaning. If you used the dictionary as a resource, you would have found this meaning. And if you knew the Greek root word for horse, that might also have helped you define this word. This would have been a morphemic clue. However you arrived at the definition, the idea of a hypophagy is pretty gruesome. Just think of the number of words that have crept into our daily vocabularies over the past 2 decades that were non-existent a generation ago, such as Google or Xerox. They now total close to 600,000 words. We all actually have 4 vocabularies. The broadest is your listening vocabulary. After all, this is the first vocabulary to develop. The second is your speaking vocabulary, and the next is your reading. As we all know, many times we've heard a word, but don't recognize it automatically in print. That listening and sometimes speaking vocabulary play an important role in decoding for students especially. When a child encounters an unfamiliar word, he uses his phonic and structural analysis skills to often come up with an approximate pronunciation for the word. If he has heard that word before, and it is in his listening vocabulary, or even better, in his speaking vocabulary, it is easier for him to link his approximation with the correct pronunciation of the word, and thus successfully decode it. As you probably know from experience, it is more difficult to decode and pronounce a word that you are totally unfamiliar with, as opposed to a word that you have heard or used verbally, but just haven't seen in printed form. So you can see how an extensive listening and speaking vocabularies can help grow one's reading vocabulary as well. Usually, the last vocabulary to establish is the writing vocabulary. Developing vocabulary on all 4 levels, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, occurs in a variety of ways. We will talk further about these points as we move through the following slides. But once again, that jump start on vocabulary development often rests on the home front. Here are some ways that children have acquired their vocabulary, but which is the most valuable contributor? Next time you are watching your favorite program, show the captions and take a closer look at the vocabulary that is used. It's not that impressive. Good children's literature, however, uses much richer language both in vocabulary and the images it creates. This is so important, especially in those early years when vocabulary is acquired primarily through listening. Here is just a small example of the richness of language that can be found in the single trade book. Children's books contain almost twice as many infrequently used or rare words than even adult conversations among college students, according to Hayes and Ahrens. So, when is a vocabulary word really acquired or owned? Many times we know about a word, we may have heard it, have a guess as to its meaning, know if it has a positive or negative connotation, know one definition for it but not others, so that we can use it in only a limited context. But a word is not fully known until this happens, according to Fontes and Pinnell. As you can probably imagine, most of this growth happens during the school year, and if a child is acquiring new vocabulary primarily during the 180-day school year, these daily rates need to double. That is a lot of vocabulary to incorporate into daily instruction. If at best it is 400 words per school year, can be successfully incorporated into instruction, as Beck and others suggest, then 2 things need to happen. Teachers must be highly selective in the words they introduce, making sure that these words give the biggest bang for the time spent on them, and students need to be taught how to acquire new vocabulary on their own. They need to become word meaning collectors. Much of this will be in teaching children strategies to help them acquire new vocabulary, as well as fostering an interest and desire to add new words to their lexicon. So, how do school-aged children acquire so many new words? Mostly incidentally, from context while reading, writing, listening, and speaking. However, the means of vocabulary acquisition changes as a child progresses through school. Remember that children in grades 1 and 2 are expanding their vocabulary by around 800 words per year. Much of that is because they are still in the learning to read phase, and the type of text that they are reading take that into account with easier, less challenging vocabulary. More sophisticated vocabulary is acquired from listening, since it would be difficult to access that vocabulary by reading. Around 3rd and 4th grade, there is a shift. Most of the foundational basics of reading have hopefully been acquired. Children are now moving into the reading to learn phase. As such, the vocabularies expand through the reading itself that they do, and this ends up surpassing the number of words that they learn by listening. This is when reading a wide genre of texts, both narrative and informative, is so important. The vocabulary in these texts becomes more substantive and sophisticated than vocabulary that they previously encountered. This reading helps to facilitate that annual growth of 3,000 words that was mentioned earlier. Think of it this way. Look at the exposure to written language and the potentially new vocabulary in this slide. We are halfway through, so let's take a break.